Hey everyone, today I'm going to be going over a Support Guardians Joust tier list. This tier list is based solely on the Guardians kit, so barring any insane kit changes, this Joust tier list should be good regardless of map, regardless of patch. Before we get started though, if you are somebody who comes back and watches my videos fairly often, I would greatly appreciate it if you subscribe. It helps me out, it's free, and it'll help inform content so that I can make better videos. So now that that's out of the way, what am I using to rate these Guardians? I came up with my own set of metrics that I think are the most important to have in the Joust game mode. Those metrics are initiation, peel, damage, healing, tankiness, and team setup. So each of those metrics is going to get a scale from 0 to 5 for a total of 0 to 30. The lower you are on that scale, you're a bad Guardian. The higher, the closer to 30 you are, priority picks. So now that you know how the gods are going to be rated on individual metrics, how do those metrics translate into tiers? I've rated all these gods from a D to an S. D is the lowest tier. These are gods that you don't really ever want to pick up at all. C, 13 to 15, is going to be a step above that, but still below average gods. B, 16 to 18, they can work, but they're just going to be average at pretty much everything. A are the picks that you want in Joust specifically. You want to make these your priorities. S is bannable gods. These gods can win you the game if you pick them or lose you the game if you don't. So without further ado, let's get into the reason why you're here and start rating these Guardians. We're going to go in alphabetical order today. So the first Guardian that we're going to talk about is Ares. Ares initiation sometimes does rely on itemization or relics. So I'm giving him a 3 out of 5. The chains are a great tool for initiation, but you have to land them. Outside of that, you do really have to rely on his ult to initiate. Peel, he gets a 2 out of 5. Aside from his chains, he doesn't have great peel for his teammates. The 2 does provide some protections, but a lot of times that's just not quite enough. Damage, Ares gets a 5 out of 5. Even if you're building full defense, his passive allows him to do tons and tons of damage. Ares is one of those Guardians that can solo a squishy at times. The next criteria that we'll be ranking is healing. Ares 2 does have enhanced HP 5 on it. It's an aura for him and his teammates. So it's an underrated aspect of Ares' kit that I think people don't necessarily think of when picking him. But it's good enough that I'm going to give it a 3 out of 5. Tankiness, he also gets a 3 out of 5. He really relies on itemization to be tanky. His 2 is somewhat of a tanky ability, but outside of that, pretty average. So we'll give him a 3. His team setup, however, is really where Ares shines. This is why you pick Ares. You pick him for his ultimate. He can get all 3 of the enemy gods into one single place for you to set up all 3 kills, or at least 1 kill for your teammates if they're following up. So now that we've looked over all the criteria, Ares gets a total score of 21 out of 30, which lands him squarely in the A tier. The next Guardian that we'll be talking about today is Artio. Artio has a lot of options for her to initiate fights, but unfortunately, there's just a lot of them that are telegraphed in ways that allow the enemy team to get away before she can really initiate that well. So she gets a 3 out of 5. For peel, pretty much the same reason. She has a lot of options to peel. She has a stun, she has slows, she has some healing, but realistically a lot of those things take too long and your squishies are dead before you have the ability to heal them. Damage, she does get a 4 out of 5. Having 6 abilities is very, very nice for a Guardian, and her ability to rotate through those and do tons of damage is really good. So this is kind of where Artio shines. Healing, she also gets a 3 out of 5. She has 1 good team heal, and then the rest of her kit is pretty much individual heals, which isn't quite as valuable. That being said, she still does have healing, and it is a part of the kit that makes her good. The tankiness category, Artio gets a 3 out of 5. She has some abilities that increase her protections. She has some abilities that decrease the enemy's power, so she can be fairly tanky, which will give her an average rating of 3. Unfortunately, team setup is where Artio falters as a Guardian in Joust. A lot of her abilities focus on soloing out one person specifically, but that gives the enemy team kind of a clue as to what you're thinking, and they can react to the point where a lot of times your teammates can't follow up the way that they'd be able to with other Guardians. So all of this taken into consideration, Artio gets a total of 18 out of 30, which puts her in our B tier. The next god we'll be talking about today is Athena. Athena is kind of funny because she's very one-dimensional, but that one dimension is super, super powerful. I gave her a 5 out of 5 in initiation. She has a good dash that can slow. Her taunt, one of the best abilities in the game for initiation, and her ultimate gives mitigations that can allow somebody on your team to initiate when they normally wouldn't be able to. Peel, she also gets a 4 out of 5. Again, taunt, super, super good ability to peel enemies off of your teammates, and the mitigations from the ultimate can really turn a team fight too. Damage, she gets a 2 out of 5. Her abilities do decent damage, but especially her 3 is pretty hard to confirm, so she does falter and struggle a little bit in the damage category, which is why I gave her a 2. Healing, she doesn't have any healing built into her kit, so pretty simply, she gets a 0 in that category. Tankiness, she gets a 3 out of 5. Again, she doesn't really have any tankiness built into her kit outside of the block stacks that she gets on her 1, so she's fairly reliant on itemization to hit that tankiness level, which is why I give her a 3. Team setup, 4 out of 5. Again, coming back to the taunt, coming back to the ultimate. There are just so many things that allow your team to follow up on the things that you're doing. The taunt being so long and pulling enemies out of position really does set up a ton of different things for your teammates, which is why she gets a 4. So all of those metrics added together means Athena gets an 18 out of 30, which puts her right in the B tier next to Artio. Next on our list of guardians is Bacchus. Bacchus is a really solid initiator. His belly flop is a long range leap that can knock enemies up. When they come down, they're also slowed, and then you are able to follow up on that with your belch, which can even stun. So it gives your teammates a lot of time to follow up on that first initiation. That's why I'm giving him a 4 out of 5. Peel is 3 out of 5. Honestly, it's a little bit harder to peel with Bacchus because the belch specifically isn't instant, so the enemies do have a little bit of time to get away. I'm giving him a 3 out of 5 in peel. Damage, he gets a 4 out of 5. His passive gives him power, his ultimate gives him a little bit of extra power, and his ability to initiate on a squishy and just delete them can be pretty surprising at times. Healing, he gets a 0 out of 5. No healing in his kit, so that's pretty self-explanatory. His tankiness is a 4 out of 5. If you are constantly chugging, his passive will give you 10% mitigations at all times. Bacchus is probably one of the hardest guardians to kill when he builds full defense and is really utilizing that passive correctly. So I'm going to give him a 4 out of 5 in tankiness. Team setup, he gets a 3 out of 5. His knock-up and his stun are really good abilities to set up for your team, but the problem is that there's a lot of times where you're initiating and your team is too far away to follow up. So you do have to be somewhat reliant on your teammates being close by to really get that full team setup, which is why I give him a 3. All of those metrics together give Bacchus an 18 out of 30 score, which will put him right in the B tier next to Artio and Athena. The next god on our list is Cabrakan. Cabrakan has an okay initiation. He has a speed boost on his 1, but when you're running at the enemies, they kind of know what is going to happen. A lot of times they can't avoid it, which is why he's still getting a 3 out of 5, but it is fairly telegraphed. Peel, he gets a 4 out of 5. He can pretty much use all 4 of his abilities to peel if he needs to. There's a stun on the 1, a stun on the 2, a tremble on the 3, and then the wall on the 4 can actually just stop enemies in their tracks if you hit it correctly. Damage, he also gets a 4 out of 5. He has a ton of damage in his kit, and his ability to solo out an enemy squishy is maybe one of the best of all the guardians, which is why he gets 4 out of 5. Healing, he has none in his kit. Again, self-explanatory. He gets a 0 there. The tankiness factor, he gets a 5 out of 5. With his passive, he is able to withstand so much damage. His tremble, everything in his kit allows him to just take damage almost like no other guardian, which is why he gets a 5 out of 5. His team setup is also a 4 out of 5. stun on 2 abilities. The tremble is really, really chaotic and allows your teammates to hit their abilities while the enemy's trying to run away. And then of course the wall, just stopping enemies from going where they want to go, allows your team to have that smaller area to get their abilities off. All of these together gives Cabrakan a 20 out of 30, which puts him in our A tier. The next Guardian on our list is Cerberus, one of my personal favorite Guardians in Joust, and part of that favoritism is due to his initiation. I gave him a 4 out of 5. The leap is a long distance way to get close to your enemies. You can shred them with the 2, and it's a slow. And of course the ultimate is a great tool to get your enemies out of position. Peel, though, he gets a 2 out of 5. Everything I just mentioned just takes a little bit too long to peel enemies off. You don't necessarily want to use your ultimate, and the 2, yes, it's a slow, but if you're 2ing them, they have time to get away. Damage, he gets a 5 out of 5. I think Cerberus is one of the highest damaging Guardians. His 2 being a complete shred and slow can just 100 to 0 somebody when they're not expecting it, and it happens a lot more often than you'd think. People just don't expect that kind of damage from a Guardian. Healing, he gets a 2 out of 5 just based on his passive. He can steal healing from the enemy team, but that's kind of for himself and not for his teammates, so it's not a super strong heal. Tankiness, he gets a 3 out of 5. He does rely on itemization quite a bit to be tanky. He's just average on that tankiness scale, which is why he gets a 3. And then team setup, he does get a 5 out of 5. He basically has a Ares ult that I think is a easier way to set that up with the jump that's built into his kit. You don't have to have a blink, right? You can jump and actually do it yourself. And you can also have a shred into a stun, which is super powerful if you hit that ability. All that being said, he gets a 21 out of 30, which puts him in that A tier. Next up on our Joust tier list for support Guardians is Cthulhu. Well, I think Cthulhu is a good god in Joust in general. I don't think he's that great of a support Guardian. That being said, his initiation is a 5 out of 5. The dash of his that's built into his kit is probably one of the best initiators in the game, and then you can follow up with the Mire, you can follow up with his ultimate, which are both really good initiation tools as well. Peel, 2 out of 5. He does not peel very well at all. His 2 does have a knockback on it. The Mire is too slow to be a really solid peel, and you don't want to use Cthulhu's ultimate to peel. Damage, he gets a 4 out of 5. He does a ton of damage when he's in his ultimate. He can do long range damage with the Mire. He really is built to be that in-your-face kind of Guardian, which is why he doesn't necessarily work that great as a support role. Healing, he gets a 2 out of 5. He does have some healing built into his kit on the ultimate. If your teammates are around you, not a very strong heal, which is why it only gets a 2. Tankiness, he also only gets a 2 out of 5. He does have health built into some of his kit, but if you are getting hit by any sort of ADC that has shred at all, you are not tanky. So for that reason, he gets a 2. Team setup, he gets a 3 out of 5 as well. Some of the things he has, like the long distance Mire, can set your teammates up for solid follow-up, but really his ultimate is about disruption, and it's not necessarily a great follow-up tool for your team. So for all those reasons, Cthulhu gets an 18 out of 30, which will put him in that B tier of our support Guardians. Alright, so far we have all our Guardians in the A and B tier, and that is about to end with the next god, Fafnir. Fafnir's initiation is severely lacking. He does have a stun on the hammer, but outside of that, there's really no tools for him to start fights. He can jump in and ult, but the other team's just going to disengage. So I don't feel that's a great tool for him. Why he gets a 2. Peel, again, he only gets a 2 for the same reasons. He really only has 2 abilities that he can use, and his ultimate is just too telegraphed to really take advantage of it in most scenarios. Damage, however, he does get a 4 out of 5 in his dragon form. He can do a surprising amount of damage, and really shred down enemies very, very quickly. Healing, he gets a 2 out of 5. He does get some individual healing from his second ability, but again, not necessarily a great team-oriented ability, which is why it only gets a 2. Tankiness, he also gets a 2 out of 5. Normally, enemies are just going to wait out your dragon. Once you are coming out of that dragon form, you're just going to get killed because there's only 2 other people in lane and they're both squishy in a lot of cases. Team setup, again, pretty low at 2 out of 5. You have the hammer, but if you miss that hammer, your team setup is down for 15 to 18 seconds or something like that. So really, there's not a lot in his kit that allows him to initiate effectively or set up for his teammates effectively. All that being said, Fafnir's score is a 14 out of 30, which puts him as our first god in that lower C tier. The next guardian that we'll be ranking today is Ganesha. Ganesha has a pretty decent all-around kit, and overall his initiation is okay. His 3 is a knockup which doesn't suffer from any diminishing returns, always a great tool. The silence can catch enemies off guard, and the ultimate can really turn a team fight in your favor right away if you initiate with it, but all those things are kind of hard to secure, so he gets a 3 out of 5. Peel, he also gets a 3 out of 5 for the same reasons. Silence can stop enemies from doing what they want to do pretty much immediately, but the other 2 abilities that he has, his 3 and his ultimate, just take too long to peel. Damage, he gets another 3 out of 5. His 1 gives his allies additional power, and his ultimate, although it's hard to confirm, is one of the highest damaging ultimate abilities in the game, so he gets a 3 out of 5 there. Healing, he gets a 0. He doesn't have any healing in his kit either. As far as tankiness goes, Ganesha is a little bit above average. He does get additional physical protections in his 2 and his Ohm. Outside of that, really not that much tankiness extra. He just is one of those tanky guardians by default, so he gets a 3. To me, one of the weaker parts of Ganesha's overall viability is his team setup. The 3 is a knockup, which is a great ability, but it's really not that easy to hit. The ultimate, again, a ton of damage, but pretty hard to confirm. And the Ohm, while it does silence enemy gods, it doesn't really put them in a specific place for your teammates to follow up on. For those reasons, Ganesha gets a total of 14 out of 30, which puts him squarely down in our C tier next to Fafnir. The next guardian we'll be ranking today is Geb. Geb is a super defensive guardian, and I think that actually kind of hurts his viability in Joust a little bit. His initiation, I gave him a 2 out of 5. The only real way that he can get close to the enemies to initiate is his rollout, but that's such a buildup of an ability that they're going to know exactly what's coming. You can kind of mess around in the jungle, but even then, that's not where you want to be with Geb. His peel is a 5 out of 5. He has 4 abilities that can peel for his teammates. He has a slow on the 1, knock up on the 2, his shield is a cleanse and a shield, and he has his ultimate, which can also stun for a pretty significant amount of time. Damage, he gets a 2 out of 5. Again, this is a very defense-focused guardian. He does have a percentage of health chunk on the ultimate, but that's really his only true damaging ability. Healing, he gets a 0 out of 5. He doesn't have any heals built into his kit automatically, so that's going to be a 0. Tankiness, he's probably one of the single most tanky gods in the entire game. Between his just base stats and all of his abilities being very tank focused, especially the shield, he is that defense guardian if that's what you need. Geb's team setup is pretty good actually. He gets a 4 out of 5. Where he struggles is that initiation, so it's kind of getting close to the enemy team is where he's going to fall short. But if he does get close, he has a knockup, which doesn't suffer from diminishing returns. He also has an ultimate ability that takes a percentage of health no matter what enemy you hit with it, so it sets your team up for a really good follow-up. For all of those reasons, Geb gets an 18 out of 30, which puts him in our B tier. Our next support guardian, and I'm doing air quotes when I'm saying that, is Jormungandr. His initiation, I gave him a 2 out of 5. He has the stealth ability, but the enemy is going to hear the heartbeat coming, and if you're initiating with his ult, which is, I guess, his only other initiation ability, you're just not using him correctly. Peel, he also gets a 2 out of 5 for the same reason. Everything he does is just telegraphed or too slow to make an impact in saving your teammates' lives. He gets a 2 there. Damage, he does a fair amount of damage. He gets 3 out of 5. His 2 has a ton of damage on it, but it has a windup that is very easily interrupted, and the 1 does a ton of damage if the enemies are just sitting in it, but any enemy isn't going to do that. His healing, he gets a 0 out of 5. He doesn't have any healing built into his kit. And his tankiness is also a 2 out of 5. He, because of his passive, actually takes extra damage and is slowed instead of being displaced in any way. And that just makes him very, very, very vulnerable, especially as a frontline or support-based guardian. His team setup, 2 out of 5. Again, there's nothing aside from the knockup, which is very, very telegraphed, that lets your teammates follow up on any of your abilities very easily. So, unfortunately, Jorm takes our lowest spot on the tier list with an 11 out of 30. He is the first guardian in our D tier. Our next guardian on the list is Khepri, another very defensive-minded guardian in the same vein as Geb, except for Khepri has a lot better initiation tools. He has a root, which if you're playing against gods that don't have movement abilities, that's already a great setup, a good initiation tool for your team that's ranged. But on top of that, he also has a pull, a grab and a pull that can pull enemies way out of position and is a death sentence early or late in certain scenarios. Peel, he also gets a 5 out of 5. He can use his 3 and his 1 as Peel. He also has a passive that gives his teammates a shield, which is its own form of Peel. And his ultimate is really the ultimate Peel as far as reviving somebody who gets killed and also giving speed to avoid getting killed in the first place. The biggest negative to Khepri in terms of his metrics is his damage. His 2 does have protection shred on it, but the pure numbers on his damaging abilities are just not there, and he's not really meant to be a damage guardian at all, so he gets a 1. Healing, he doesn't have any healing built into his hit either, so he's going to get a 0 in healing. Because Khepri is really meant to be that support guardian in the true sense of the support role, his tankiness is pretty unbelievable. He has a 5 out of 5 here. He gets a shield based on his health, which is a ton of extra tankiness for you and for your teammates. Probably one of the best tanks in the game. Team setup, he also gets a 4 out of 5 for similar reasons as initiation. He can really put enemies in a position that they don't want to be in, and your abilities aren't going to displace them too much where your team can't follow up. So with all those metrics added together, Khepri gets a total score of 19 out of 30, which will put him right in the A tier next to Cerberus, Cabrakan, and Ares. The next guardian we'll talk about today is Kumbhakharna. He isn't picked up that often, but I do think he can be fairly average in Joust. His initiation, he does have a good amount of tools to initiate fights. He has a mesmerize if you're close enough. He has a dash that can make you get closer if you need to. His root is kind of a long windup, but if you hit it, it can be a good initiation tool as well. And then the ultimate can start a fight off pretty easily. Peel, same reasons as initiation. He has a mesmerize that can peel very, very effectively and stop anybody just in their tracks and give your teammates time to get away if they need it. Root, a little bit harder to hit, and you don't necessarily want to use your ultimate for Peel. Damage, he also gets a 3 out of 5. Some of the damaging abilities are a little bit hard to confirm. If you look at the root, it's a long windup. If you look at the 1 launching a minion, which is a little bit more damage, kind of hard to hit at long range. But combining all of his abilities together, he can do decent damage, so he gets a 3. Healing, he gets a 0 out of 5. No healing built into his kit whatsoever. Tankiness, he also gets a 3 out of 5. He's pretty tanky already. He doesn't necessarily have anything in his kit to make him tankier, but he does a okay job of staying alive when he needs to, and he can peel for himself. Team setup, I gave him a 4 out of 5. This is probably his strong suit. He has a great ability to single out one person on the enemy team and just delete them or set them up for deletion by your teammates. The ultimate is one of the best setup abilities in the game for a single target. So for that reason, I gave him a 4. All of these metrics added together gives Kumbhakharna a total of 16 out of 30, which puts him right in the B tier. The next god on our list is Kuzenbo. A Kuzenbo is a pretty good initiator. He has a long range throw as his kappa that can hit enemies from a really long way away and slow them. He can also push them out of position with his 3, which is kind of a long dash as well. So he does a good job at starting those fights when you need to. Peel, he gets a 3 out of 5 there as well. He has the push really is his main peel tool, but if he hits somebody with his Nene, that can be enough of a slow to peel too. Damage, he gets a 4 out of 5. I think Kuzenbo is one of those more offensive guardians. He has a lot of damage on his Nene. His ultimate does a lot of damage. His reflect damage is really surprising at times, and he can single people out with the push. Healing, he gets a 0 out of 5. He doesn't have any healing built into his kit at all. Tankiness is one of Kuzenbo's strong suits. His passive allows him to get up to 15% damage mitigation on top of everything else going on, no matter what build he has. Plus his 2, the Thorns effect, where he can reflect damage, really allows him to be in the face of enemies without taking too much punishment at all. Team setup, he gets a 2 out of 5. He does have a lot of ways to displace the enemy team, but the drawback with Kuzenbo's displacement is there are a lot of times where it can be detrimental to your teammates. If you're pushing them out of an ability that they were expecting to hit, or if you hit the ultimate and they're being knocked up out of an ability they're expecting to hit, it can kind of almost work as an anti-setup tool. So with all of those metrics added together, Kuzenbo gets a 16 out of 30, which puts him in the B tier. The next guardian on our Joust tier list is going to be Sobek. Sobek has a ton of really good initiation tools, which is why I'm going to give him a 5 out of 5, most notably his pluck. So if you hit a pluck, it's pretty well known that that is probably the best initiation in the game. You can pull the enemy team, somebody from the enemy team, almost halfway across the Joust lane. So there really is almost no better setup. Peel, he also gets a 4 out of 5. He can use the pluck as a peel. He also has a tail whip, which is a knock-up and really interrupts enemies from what they're trying to do. On top of that, his ultimate is a slow and does a ton of damage and really discourages enemies from continuing a fight or continuing to chase. Damage, he gets a 4 out of 5 there as well. All his abilities really do a good amount of damage, and his ultimate especially is one of those abilities that takes enemies by surprise a lot of times. Healing, he gets a 1 out of 5. He does have a heal built into his 3, but it's a selfish heal. It's not necessarily a team heal, so that's lower on the healing scale. Tankiness, he gets a 5 out of 5. His passive allows him to take a ton of damage. On top of that, he has a sustain built in with his heal, and he has a lot of ways that he can just stay alive a lot longer than you'd expect. Team setup, I gave Sobek a 3 out of 5. The pluck is obviously a great initiation tool, and your teammates should be able to see where that plucked enemy is going to land, but it's really not that easy to follow up on, and it's only one person. Adding all of these metrics up, Sobek gets a grand total of 22 out of 30, which puts him in that S tier. So that means that if you are not comfortable playing Sobek, or you don't know how to play against him, he's probably actually ban worthy in Joust. The next guardian we'll be rating on our tier list scale is Sylvanus. Sylvanus has good initiation tools between his long range root and the pull from his 1 that can pull enemies out of position easily. The problem is he doesn't have a great way to get that close to enemies, so you're going to have to be at that long range every time when you do initiate, unless you buy a relic like Blink. Peel, he gets a 2 out of 5. The 1 is pretty hard to hit on its own, and a lot of times the 2, although it's a root, if the enemies have any sort of movement ability, they're going to still be able to follow up and kill your teammates before you can react. Sylvanus gets a 2 as far as damage is concerned. He does have a lot of damage on his ult, but if you're not building him full damage, he really doesn't have great damage numbers. Healing, he gets a 4 out of 5. This is probably why you pick Sylvanus if you do pick him at all. He gets great team heals. He can apply them very easily, and it's a whole team-wide heal. So he gets a 4 out of 5 in healing. Tankiness, he gets a 2 out of 5. He's really not that tanky as far as Guardians go, so he's singled out fairly easily, and he can kind of get shredded because he doesn't have movement abilities either. I gave Sylvanus a 2 out of 5 in team setup. He does have the pull, which can take enemies and bring them to your team. Unfortunately, that can also be detrimental if your teammates aren't expecting that. It can lead to deaths at times, or just unexpected ways that your teammates were trying to hit an ability and you pulled them out of it. I think Sylvanus's best team setup is his ultimate, but he has a tough time getting close enough to the enemy team without relics to hit that ultimate, which is why I gave him a 2. Taking all of these scores into consideration, Sylvanus gets a total of 15 out of 30, which will put him right down in the C tier. The next Guardian on our tier list is Terra. Terra has really good initiation tools in Joust. Her 2 is a long range, a wall into stun that she can use effectively because it's a small lane, and the 3 is also a huge area of effect that she can hit for a root. So she gets a 4 out of 5 for initiation. Peel, she has a little bit of a harder time using those abilities to peel because it does require a little bit more setup, but with her heal on top of her ultimate, I'm still giving her a 3 out of 5 in peel. Damage, she also gets a 3 out of 5. All her abilities can do pretty decent damage, especially the ult at times with that percentage on it, and her basics can cleave and slow, which leads her to doing more damage, which is why I give her a 3. Healing, she gets a 4 out of 5. That area of effect on the 3 is so large, and it just gives that heal over time, that she is one of the more effective Guardian healers. Tankiness, I gave her a 3 out of 5. The only real tankiness she has built into her kit is on her ultimate, but she's a pretty tanky Guardian just inherently with her base stats, so giving her an average 3. Terra's team setup is a 3 out of 5. Again, she can really set up from long range, but at times your teammates have trouble following up because it is such long range setup. Her ultimate can also be used to really start a fight off and turn the tables in your favor just even before the fight gets started. So for that reason, I'm giving her a 3. All of these metrics added together give Terra a total of 20 out of 30, which puts her up in the A tier. The next Guardian on our tier list today is going to be Xing Tian. Xing Tian is a really good initiator. He does have a dash that allows him to get past walls and into the enemy backline if he needs to. He has a knock-up and a root on his 2, and then his ultimate is also really good initiation tool if you're in the middle of a fight. For that reason, I'm giving him a 4 out of 5. Peel, he gets a 3 out of 5. The root, again, the knock-up into root is sometimes not that easy to hit when there are multiple enemy gods attacking your teammates, and you can use the ultimate as peel, but I would not necessarily recommend that. Damage, he gets a 4 out of 5. His breath does a surprising amount of damage. The ultimate always does a surprising amount of damage, and he can, like I said, get into the enemy's face really easily with his 3. Healing, he gets a 1 out of 5. He doesn't have any healing built into his kit technically, but his passive does give him up to 36 HP 5, which is not insignificant, so I'm giving him a 1. Tankiness, he gets a 5 out of 5. His 3 gives him protections. The HP 5 built in as a passive allows him to stay alive in situations where he should never be able to stay alive, so he gets a 5 out of 5 in tankiness. And team setup, he gets a 4 out of 5. He can set up kills with his 2 really easily, but on top of that, he has another one of those ults similar to Ares, similar to Cerberus, where he can get the entire enemy team into one place for your teammates to follow up on, which is super valuable in Joust. For these reasons, all of his metrics add him up to a 20 out of 30. That will put him in the A tier. The next Guardian we will be ranking on our Joust tier list is Yemoja. Yemoja is a great initiator. The 3 can pull enemies out of position and bring them towards you. She also has a slow, she also has a stun, and then her ultimate, if she's in position and hits it correctly, can really trap people in and initiate fights really, really effectively. 4 out of 5 for Yemoja. Peel, she gets a 3 out of 5. A little bit harder for her to hit some of those abilities. For peel purposes, the 3 can do it. The slow isn't quite as effective. The stun takes a little bit longer, so she gets a 3 out of 5 in peel. Damage, she also gets a 3 out of 5. She does a lot of damage early, but it can kind of fall off, especially if you're putting more than one point into that 1 early. Sometimes you don't necessarily want to do that because the 2 is also a great ability in Joust. Speaking of that, healing, she gets a 5 out of 5. She gets a bouncing team heal on her 2, and on top of that, she also gets infinite heals with her basic attacks. Might not seem like much right away, but it can really add up over the entirety of a Joust game and kind of turn the tide in your favor. Tankiness is probably Yemoja's weak spot as a Guardian. She just doesn't really have that much built-in tankiness on her base stats, and there's nothing in her kit that allows her to be super, super tanky. So she's pretty average, which is why I'm giving her a 3. Team setup, she gets a 4 out of 5. She can pull enemies out of position with her 3 really, really easily. There's a stun. She has a slow. And then, of course, the ultimate, which really can wall off the entire team or just one person if you need it to. So there are a lot of ways that she can set up for her team, which is why she gets a 4 out of 5. All of these metrics added together puts Yemoja at a 22 out of 30, which will allow her to be in our S tier. Obviously, S is bannable gods or priority picks. The last god on our Joust tier list is going to be Ymir. Ymir does have pretty good initiation tools, but you almost have to use his entire kit to do it correctly, and he doesn't have an easy way to get to the enemy team at times, so I'm giving him a 3 out of 5 in initiation. Peel, I'm giving him a 4 out of 5, however. A lot of times you're going to be right by your teammates, and although your abilities are close range, that's all you need. The freeze is a great peel ability. It stops enemies from what they're doing immediately. You can wall enemies off between your teammates and them so they can't do any damage at all. You have a slow, and you also have an ultimate that really discourages enemies from fighting near you. Damage, Ymir gets a 3 out of 5. He does pretty good at damage as a Guardian, but it's not anything close to Ares or Cerberus, so he gets just an average 3 out of 5 in damage. Ymir does not have any healing built into his kit, so he's going to get a 0 out of 5 in the healing metric. I'm giving Ymir a 4 out of 5 in tankiness. Although he doesn't have any mitigations necessarily built into his kit, what he does have with his passive Frostbite, if you're applying that effectively, is 15% less damage taken from that source. So even though it's not really mitigations or tankiness in the same sense, all the enemies are going to be doing less damage to you, which makes him tanky. Team setup, he's getting a 3 out of 5. The freeze is a great setup. The wall can really put the enemies in a bad position and funnel them into a place where your team can follow up. So that's going to be a 3. All of these metrics added together give Ymir a grand total of 17 out of 30, which puts him right in the B tier. So that is it. That is our Support Guardian Joust tier list. I'm going to freeze on the final tier list so you can take screenshots if you want to. I will also link my score sheet below and the tier list itself. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like, comment, and subscribe. I really do appreciate it.